Welcome to Alan Skorsky Reports. I'm Alan Skorsky. We are now over 400 days since the October 7th massacre, in which over 1,200 innocent civilians, men, women, the elderly, young girls, and babies were savagely murdered, and over 250 people were taken hostages by Hamas. Since then, we have watched Western democracies blame Israel for over-defending themselves. We've watched Hamas supporters across North America and Europe taking over the streets, particularly on college campuses, and extracting concessions from them. Many European countries have started to grant official recognition to a Palestinian state, while college campuses agree to offer more scholarships and teaching positions to those identifying as Palestinian. To Jews in America, European anti-Semitism doesn't come as a shock anymore. But when the U.S. administration started threatening Israel with sanctions, including withholding arms shipments, while also stating, "This is why we need a two-state solution," many of us in America thought to ourselves, this is what 1930s Germany must have looked like. Today's guest, Dr. Einat Wilf, who is a former member of the Knesset, who served in the Labor Party, and is also the author of the must-read book, The War of Return: How Western Indulgence of the Palestinian Dream Has Obstructed the Path to Peace. She has also spoken before European parliaments to address the myth of Palestinian refugees and how they themselves have been complicit in the creation of Hamas through their funding of UN agencies like UNRWA. Dr. Wilf, it's an honor to have you with us today.
Thank you.
Okay, so there's a lot to talk about, especially in your book, and just the subtitle is perfect: How the Western Indulgence of the Palestinian Dream Has Obstructed the Path to Peace. So in your book and your other lectures, you've spoken at length about UNRWA, the role that UNRWA, the myth of UNRWA, that it's just a UN agency, when in reality it is complicit in indoctrinating Hamas. And again, we go back to the Western indulgence. We see it today after everything that happened October 7th. And at the Democrat convention, President Biden said of the protesters, they have a point. Other Democrats, and I'm not making this political, it's just what's been happening here, have said this is why we need a two-state solution. None of this would have happened before Oslo, because before Oslo, there was no Palestinian Authority. There was only the PLO and Yasser Arafat. But since Oslo, Palestinianism has become normalized and become a real mainstream situation that the West, especially America, wants to resolve. And since you've written and spoken so much about this, I want to give you the floor to address it.
Okay, so there's no doubt that a key part of our book is indeed the Western indulgence part. It's not just about the Arab commitment, to their credit, very consistent, to the Arab commitment to what our legendary ambassador Abba Eban called policide, the idea that the Jews cannot be sovereign, that they cannot have a state of any size and any borders in any part of their ancient homeland. So the book is also about that consistent Arab vision, and especially how it became encapsulated in the Palestinian vision of return, in this perpetuation, generation after generation, of the lie that they are still refugees into the millions of a war long over, except that the reason is that in their mind it's not over. So the book talks a lot about the Arab dream and the Palestinian vision, but no less does it speak about the Western indulgence. Basically, the way that the West has allowed a certain pattern to emerge. And we're even seeing it now in the various negotiations, you alluded to it, where when the Arabs say, absolutely not, no Jewish state, the West says, okay, well, that's their position, but it's never challenged. And when Israel says, look, we're willing to compromise, but we don't want to commit suicide, the West gets angry. I'm like, how dare you? And apparently, it's a remarkable pattern. It's at the core of UNRWA. In the book, we tell the story of the Swedish Count Folke Bernadotte, who was charged by the powers by trying to end the war in 1948. And he's in many ways the forefather of this pattern. He goes to the Arabs. They tell him absolutely not, no recognition, no Jewish state from the river to the sea.
Right.
And he says, and he comes out and he writes in his diary, that was an excellent meeting. I felt that I was well received. And then he goes to Ben Gurion and the Jews, and they tell him, look, we're willing to compromise, even though he's demanding of them. That's also a pattern. He's demanding of them things that are not demanded of any other, especially victorious power. And they say, look, we're willing to compromise, we're willing to go out of our way, but we won't commit suicide. And he comes out of those meetings incredibly angry. And it's a pattern that we see over the years, just in this indulgence, that if Arabs and Palestinians say no Jewish state, rather than challenging them on that, rather than telling them enough is enough, you need to come to terms with the fact that it's over. You've been defeated. Given that your goal for the last century has been initially to prevent and then to undo a Jewish state, in that you've been defeated, move on. You can be a constructive people who want to live next to the Jewish state rather than a destructive one. But you don't hear that. That's not the things you hear. You just hear the constant indulgence. The Palestinians will attack. And I'm increasingly saying that none of us actually know what really happened on October 7th. It will take years, if not decades, for many of us to fathom the evil that was unleashed on that day. And I think when people will begin to realize what happened, they will wonder why Israel was so restrained in its response. Right. So, but all we're saying is that rather than clear calls for surrender, there's calls for a ceasefire. Right now, Israel is on the verge of signing a rehash of the agreement that we had with Hezbollah and Lebanon before their unprovoked attack. And it's only with Israel that there is this pattern that Israel's enemies can attack it, they will fail, and then they get to restore the same conditions that they had before they attacked Israel, rather than being forced to pay a price, which is what other countries had to do when they failed.
Right. So again, you mentioned UNRWA. And here's what's interesting, because I mean, a lot of us only started hearing about it now because when Israel went into Gaza and they were able to uncover that 7, 8, 9, 10 members were actually part of Hamas and they participated, in the actual October 7th massacre and bringing the hostages back. But in the book, you go into great detail how the Arab states demanded that UNRWA play a role, not the role that the U.S. had set out, that they will be there just to help them get started, a hand up, not a handout, as they say. And from there, the Palestinians will find a new home. But no, they wanted it to be called the UN to make the Western democracies responsible, but that there would never be the giving up of return. Now, one thing that's also interesting, and again, I want you to talk, even though I keep talking now. When I was in college, going back into the 80s, there was a speaker there. I don't remember his name, but he said to the Arab audience, in 100 years, there won't be an Israel. And I laughed because, it's very bold to make a prediction. What will be in 100 years when no one can say, oh, you were wrong. But my point at this, Arabs play the long game. They can wait things out. I remember Saeb Erekat saying, and he was the negotiator, why should we make any concessions now? We're just going to keep playing this out. And now there's actually an organization in America called Within Our Lifetime, because for them, it's about playing the long game.
Yes, absolutely. Over the years, I invented a word in the book. It's called West-plaining. It's when Western diplomats and journalists explain away what Palestinians inconveniently say. So during the years when I would bring kind of the information about UNRWA to European capitals who fund UNRWA, they will say, oh, please, the Palestinians know that there's not going to be a return. They know that Israel's here to stay. It's a delusion. It's a claim. And I said, open a map. They're opening a map. What they're looking at is 7 million Jews struggling to survive amidst 500 million Arabs that, despite some good developments in the Gulf, are still by and large devoted to policide, to the non-existence of the Jewish state, supported by 2 billion Muslims who are also by and large supportive of the non-existence of a Jewish state. From their perspective, they're not irrational. They just need to wait us out. One more generation, 5 more generations. This is the reason that they call Israel the second Crusader state, because the first Crusader state lasted 88 years with Jerusalem, about 200 without. So as far as they're concerned, they're on track. The Arabs and Muslims fought the Crusader state from day one, as they did with the Jewish state. And in their world, sooner or later, will be gone. So yes, this is their view. It's not irrational from their perspective, especially if you look at the numbers. And the problem is that not enough people are just listening to them. They're engaging in this West-planing. But the Arabs, to their credit, and especially the Palestinians, have been very clear about what their goal is and about the fact that they are consistently operating to that goal. And the reason that I focus so much on UNRWA is that it makes it harder to fight the Arab and Palestinian vision when it's camouflaged so well with an organization that has the letters UN in it and gets funded by the West, and it makes it sound like such a benevolent cause. And I basically call UNRWA the camouflage of the Palestinian cause of no Jewish state. And its fuel, of course.
Yeah. Now, here's what's interesting. 2 groups that I'm really a big fan of are Memory and Palestinian Media Watch. Itamar Marcus from Palestinian Media Watch, by the way, he's a huge fan of yours. When I told him that I'm going to be speaking with you, he said, oh my God, she's the best. So he too addresses European parliaments. And he's been here to America. He's testified before Congress. And for a while, they will suspend funding to these UN groups and to the Palestinians. Now, you say that the Europeans only have to take out a map. Forget the map. They say you have declaration, you've got video, you've got the audio of them saying that they will never relinquish their right to return and to annihilate. So they say this every day. And this is why, again, I don't know if I'm just incredibly naive, but if I can see it, and you see it and you testify, and they're saying it themselves, what is it that we're missing? I mean, you look at the UK, look at France. They're marching in the streets. They are destroying the continents that have hosted them. So what is it that the West is missing?
So first, it's important for me to say that there's actually no such thing as a right of return. So there's nothing to relinquish, but they believe they have it. But you're right. After October 7th, a darker thought has entered my mind. Because before October 7th, I spent by now 15 years writing, researching, advocating on issues relating to UNRWA. And the book, The War of Return, even when people don't like the recommendations of defund UNRWA and there's no such thing as a right of return, they don't argue with the facts of the book. The book is like rock solid on facts. So I thought, okay, we're going to bring all those facts to the Europeans. They will understand that they are funding something that undermines their own policy of making peace by means of 2 states, because UNRWA ensures that it works for there to be not a Jewish state. So kind of undermines the idea of a 2-state solution. So I thought, okay, they will see the facts and they will change their policy. And especially after October 7th, and especially after I saw the fanatical support that so many European countries have for UNRWA, the pressure on the Israeli parliament not to vote to stop its voluntary cooperation with UNRWA, a darker thought has crept into my mind that said, could it be that it's not that the Europeans do not know what they're funding when they're funding UNRWA? Could it be that they know very well? Could it be that somewhere in their civilizational gut, very subconsciously, they are essentially outsourcing their ambivalence with a Jewish state
Right.
to UNRWA and the Palestinians so that they can continue to ensure that Jews will not be sovereign?
Yeah. So now this brings me now to another point. Um, Again, in America, everything is always changing. Europe has always been Europe. I've watched Macron. He's been the president of France for a few years, and now it's getting worse. In the UK, it keeps changing. It goes Jeremy Corbyn, and then it goes conservative, and now it's back and forth, and now it's back into the Labour Party. Um, in the UK, they've had their own issue. They have their no-go zones. You've had direct threats. You've had ISIS people going back and forth. And it's too easy to say anti-Semitism because that's always the easy card to play. And Douglas, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Can I stop for a minute? Can we do a 5-minute break?
Yeah. Go ahead. Yes.
Yes.
So you're saying about Europe.
Yes. So you said that kind of anti-Semitism is the easy answer.
Right.
But anti-Semitism, I think a lot of people don't understand it because they think of it as a very, very specific ideology. But anti-Semitism rests on a broader, shall we say, civilizational attitude towards Jews. Not a lot of people are aware that in a certain strain of Christianity, there is, by the way, not the ones that you have mostly in America, there is this notion that rests on older Christian theology that the dispossession of the Jews, their exile, their misery, are actually essential proof that God has kind of moved his love from the Jews to the Christians. And thereby, essentially, Jewish misery, dispossession, statelessness becomes almost an essential tenet of a certain branch of Christian theology. That part still exists in the European underbelly, sometimes in a secularized form. Anti-Semitism gave it its secularized form. Certainly, it exists in the Russian kind of Christian Orthodox Church, where again it became secularized into the protocols of the elders of Zion. So that's still a very foundational strain that I would not just call it simply anti-Semitism. I would just describe it as a deep unease with the idea of Jewish power. Maybe I'll say that there's another strain of Christianity, one essentially emerging from the Reformation, that because they directly read the Bible, they imagined Jews as Israelites, as kings, as warriors, as prophets, and therefore they are more at ease with the idea of Jews being powerful, sovereign in their state. But especially in Europe, you still have this ancient strain of deep, deep unease with Jewish power.
Again, and that's a Christianity that we're not used to because here in America, our strongest ally are the evangelical Christians, and they are probably more outspokenly pro-Israel than most Jews are. So this is certainly, again, an interesting perspective that you bring. Let me ask you a question with the limited time we have left. I know that, again, we had the Biden administration, and I'm not making this political. I'm a Republican. But when it comes to support for Israel and anti-Semitism, I have no party loyalty. There are some Democrats who have been staunch supporters of Israel. But we had the Biden administration whose cabinet was filled with Israel haters. When Kamala Harris was running, her outreach director to the Arab community and the Jewish community were both anti-Israel. Their Jewish outreach person, I forgot his name, I don't care. I think his last name was Goldberg. He was a supporter of J Street. He supported the Iran nuclear deal. And as I mentioned earlier at the Democrat convention, Joe Biden said of the Hamas protesters, they have a point. Now we have an incoming Trump administration. And this has just been his cabinet picks from Marco Rubio to Pete Hegseth and for UN Ambassador Elise Stefanik. I love Nikki Haley. You've seen my profile picture with her that I love to show off. But this has just been a who's who of the most pro-Israel cabinet. Now, again, I don't know what happens. I don't know if he's going to try and wring concessions from Bibi or not, because he can say, listen, I've got the most pro-Israel cabinet. Look at my record. I don't know. But what do you think? What is Israel looking for now? I mean, Trump said he wants to wrap things up. That can mean whatever you want it to mean. What do you see from your perspective, where things go from here?
So I sincerely hope that the vision that he will bring forward and that will guide his actions and the administration's action is one that essentially focuses on getting the Arab world and the Palestinians in particular to finally accept the Jewish state. I hope the message will broadly be enough is enough. I think that's what he did very well in his first term. The accumulation of his policies, from defunding UNRWA, closing the PLO representation, recognizing the Golan Heights, recognizing Jerusalem, and also offering Palestinians a state, to which Israel said yes, and the Palestinians, true to form, said no, no, and 1,000 times no. But I think what he did well is essentially through his actions send a message of enough is enough. The War of 1948 is over, which means we're defunding UNRWA. The War of 1967 is over, which means we're recognizing the Golan Heights and Jerusalem as Israel's capital. And I think that is actually a message that is more likely to bring peace than the constant message of indulgence, ceasefires, pressing Israel. Because seriously, Israel has never been the problem, except, of course, for its very existence. But in terms of the willingness to compromise, I always say that Israel and the Jews have always agreed to a two-state solution, provided that one of the two is the Jewish state. And the Arabs have always rejected a two-state solution if one of the two is the Jewish state. So that's the thing that needs to change. The long game has to change. They basically need to understand that, again, insofar that they have spent the last century trying to prevent and then undo a Jewish state, they have failed. I even said to someone that I genuinely hope that a President Trump will give a "you lost" speech and basically tell them enough is enough. You lost, deal with it, and move on. You cannot be losers forever. And also, the idea, I always like to say that anti-Zionism, every society that has supported the Palestinians for the last century, the Nazis, the Pan-Arabists, the Soviets, and now the Iranians, they ultimately found themselves in the dustbin of history. And this is not a theological argument, it's a sociological one, because every society that becomes obsessed with blaming Jews, it ultimately collapses onto itself. So again, using his colorful language, if he could make it clear that anti-Zionism is the ideology of losers, it also was the ideology of, indeed, the losers now in the election. So if he could push back on these ideologies, really help the Arab world and the Palestinians pursue a path which, to quote the title of a book about Japan post-World War II, embracing defeat, to embrace that they were defeated in their efforts to prevent the existence of a Jewish state, and that they can now develop a constructive, positive vision like Japan, like Germany post-World War II, that makes them a pillar of peace, that makes them constructive nations rather than destructive ones. I sincerely hope that will be the direction.
So, again, we've got a few minutes left. Newt Gingrich is often, and other Republicans are often talking about this, and they say that we're at least 1 to 2 generations away from having peace, because the indoctrination has been so instilled in these young. I remember I ran into an Arab kid, God, less than a year ago, and I asked him, "Where are you from?" He said, "I'm from Palestine." Now, he couldn't have been more than 20 years old, and I wasn't going to get into a whole discussion with him because this was a business contact. But what they have been taught, what they've been indoctrinated with, it's so beyond where we are now, that I think that the only people who can shut this down, it won't even be Trump. It'll be the Saudis. It'll be other Arab countries who are going to have to tell, Abu Mazen, Mahmoud Abbas, whatever you want to call him, the rest of them, we're done with you. This is the way it's going to be, and there is no more waiting game.
I sincerely hope so. There's no doubt that the Arabs are in a position precisely because they know that the conflict has never been about settlement or occupation or any
Right.
of these things. They know that the conflict has only ever been about a complete rejection of a Jewish state. They're definitely in the position to say enough is enough. I hope that they will decide to do so. I hope they will be encouraged by the United States to do so. And the thing is, I don't know how long it will take to take the Palestinians to a more constructive direction. By the way, once they forgo their century-long war against the Jewish state, they will probably no longer be called Palestinians
Right.
because they hijacked the name Palestine as part of their war against Jewish sovereignty and against the Jewish state. So I'm all in favor of the people themselves ultimately having dignity and freedom and sovereignty. But for that, they have to let go of this ideology, of this obsession of no Jewish state. Now, I don't care if it takes one generation, two generations. I just want to start the process.
Right.
This is why I call myself a long-term peace activist. This is why I write about UNRWA. I want to first end the process that has been going on for so long of fueling, indulging their vision of no Jewish state, and then begin the process of helping them become a constructive people who want to live next to a Jewish state. That would be great, however long it takes, but I want to start that.
Dr. Wilf, it has been an honor to have you. You're a delight. Your book is fantastic. It's called The War of Return. I recommend everyone read it. You've been great, and I wish you and your family continued success, continued safety, and God bless. And I look forward to meeting you on my next trip to Israel. Thank you so much for
Thank you.
joining us.